Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I have another fabulous, fabulous guest with me today. I have Erin Berry with me, who is a conscious relationship intimacy coach and pleasure priestess. Welcome.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
Really fun, really fun. Erin is also a Vita sex, love, and relationship with me. That's why we're connecting, and we're talking all about Tantra, of course, and boundaries and limiting beliefs and conditioning and whatever else shows up as per usual, because we really don't plan these things. We just kind of go, that sounds good. Let's play. Let's talk. Let's connect and see what feels alive today. So we're going to dive into all of that. But first, let's start about you. Who are you? Who is Erin? Who do you serve? What do you do? All that jazz.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm a relationship and intimacy coach. I work with both men and women, and I consider myself the full life cycle relationship coach. I help people end relationships, heal from them, call them what they desire, and then create deep intimacy once they've got it. I also have a membership for women where it's the pleasure membership. We just play with reclaiming our own pleasure and owning it for ourselves.
I love that. I love that. So, what's your story? Like, give us a little bit more of your background, if you may. Like, what brought you into this realm? How did you become a relationship and pleasure coach and pleasure priestess and all of these things?
Yeah, started about 8 years ago, actually. Before then, on the self-love journey, but then I actually got divorced about 8 years ago and really wanted to figure out what I had been up to in that relationship and how to not repeat it.
Mm.
So it started me off on my own personal journey where I leaned into studying Tantra and intimacy. I also felt like something was missing there. Like I just wanted to understand, like there had to be something more to intimacy, and I had just personally never experienced it. So I was like, what is this about? So my journey of learning for myself then, of course, led me straight into realizing that, oh my gosh, this stuff is really cool, and I want to share it with as many people as I can. So that's how I ended up in our training together and do what I do now.
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, yeah, it's such a journey. It's not easy navigating these relationships, right? Or not easy holding, different boundaries and checking in. Like, how did you, even at 8 years then, how did you, or 8 years ago, how did you, because you hadn't really started your Tantra journey yet when you left your marriage, right? With divorce. How did you actually check in and align with what your truth was and know what your truth was to move through that divorce process versus today where you are connected to body, to pelvic bowl, intuitive power, and all of that? What was the difference? I'm actually really curious about that.
Well, you have to rewind about 20 years, which is where my
Go
spiritual
for it.
that started then, right? Spiritual growth. Went to a retreat. I remember the retreat leader asked me if I loved myself. And I was like, of course I do. And then realized pretty quickly after there that no, I actually didn't. And actually, one of the
Mm.
agreements that me and my ex-husband had was that we didn't like me and we just talked smack about me. So as I
Oh,
started my journey of waking up and realizing that and actually starting to love myself, I started to stand up for myself. I then became a yoga teacher. So I guess my Tantra journey did start before 8 years because one of them was very immersed in the philosophy of it. And, so it's like you hear like a lot of people who go through those kind of certifications end up getting divorced because you're waking up to the truth of who you are. And so
mm.
I feel like I got to a place in my growth journey where I hit a glass ceiling and I couldn't go any further with him in my world, but I also just had begun to realize that we were two totally different people and we actually didn't make any sense together and probably never did. I think
Mm,
it's just
mhm.
following my conditioning.
Mm. And conditioning is so important. And you mentioned, you were asked, do you love yourself? And you're like, oh, I guess I don't. What were the, like afterwards, in the beginning, you thought, yes. What were the signs? I'm curious. What were the signs that you're like, oh shit, maybe I don't love myself? What were those things that maybe other people listening are like, oh shit, maybe I don't either? Just curious what's there.
Yeah, I mean, a big one is that I started to listen to the inner dialogue and realize that nothing I said about myself was loving and kind. I had
Mm.
had an eating disorder back in college. That should have been an indicator right there. And I started to really witness that I had several people in my life who actually didn't like who I was. Like a big part of the work I do
Oh.
now is around self-acceptance because that's something that has been very hard fought for me. I'm realizing I didn't accept myself, so the people in my world didn't either.
Mm. So key and so important to, yeah, if we aren't connected to our truth and we don't know who we are and we don't know what we want, how do we expect to be with a partner who will support us in our best, fullest part of ourselves?
Right? Right. As we hide half of ourselves, that works well.
Right? Exactly the same thing, which, yeah, I wasn't my full authentic self in my previous marriage. I couldn't show up that way.
Yeah.
It wasn't safe to show up that way. I would have been judged. I would have been ridiculed. I was called crazy multiple times.
Oh, me too.
And then it was funny because then kind of they get the kids on board, the teenagers, to also call you crazy. Mom's crazy, right? Different things like that. And it eats at you where
Mhm.
you're like, maybe I am crazy. And then you kind of rewind and you're like, wait a minute. Once you do the work, you're like, okay, I am not crazy. But that was, microaggressions. And I wasn't really seeing myself for who I was. So, of course, I was in a relationship for somebody who also didn't see me for who I was.
Right. And you know, what's really interesting to reflect now is that people have chosen me in the past probably for my free-spirited wildness. And I have a
Mm,
whole theory about how, the wild primal feminine is really, that's that, right? And if you are an unintegrated masculine human on the planet, not integrated with your own divine feminine, you will project crazy onto other
mm.
people because it feels you can't control that. You can't control that energy. And you don't have to control it if you understand it. But so many people don't. So I feel that very much. I've had to heal a crazy wound as well. And it's one of my like hot buttons. So I love that you brought it up so I could get on my soapbox about it.
Yeah, and that's cute. Love it. Definitely, I did a lot of my work in the marriage, not even thinking the marriage was going to go anywhere. I just thought I needed to do my work. If I didn't do my work, there was going to be no me left because I was feeling very depleted, very exhausted. There had to be something more. Ended up being not happy and actually literally thought there was something wrong with me for
Yeah.
most of my 30s and 20s, right? So it was like, why can't I be the better, like those moms? Why can't I show up like that wife? Why can't I show up like that woman? Uh, and the truth is, a lot of them were probably also people pleasing and pretending and living through conditioning as well, and not actually showing their full truth and self. And it left me feeling, yeah, not good enough. That conditioning is so strong. And it's all very linked, right? This conditioning, this what we grew up with messages, people pleasing, boundaries, not able to hold boundaries. What do you have to say on that? Let's dive into that and help break that down for people of, you know, what does it look like when you have this conditioning living in your day to day and you don't even know it's there? What does it look like when you're not holding boundaries? What are healthy boundaries? Let's go into all that.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I think you kind of nailed it with the safety component. I think so often we are seeking safety externally without actually realizing we create that for ourselves. And the conditioning, as you're saying, is something it's like we have learned, it's like we've been trained and molded in a way that fits other people's boxes, essentially. It's what keeps us small and it's what
Mm,
keeps us being truly authentically who we are. And what happens is we lose pieces of ourselves because we think they're not okay. It's that full acceptance piece, going back to that. And so we operate in these ways that actually don't serve us. Like people pleasing is a big one. It's always funny to me. People either deny they have it or they wear it like a badge of honor.
mm,
Sure, you've
mm.
both sides of that.
Yes, the badge of honor one's interesting. But let's break it down for people who are listening. Like, what do you mean people pleasing? Let's break that. Yeah, go deeper.
Yeah. So one of my favorite sayings is that people pleasing is a form of control, which is kind of mind blowing when most people hear that.
Mm,
I can totally relate to this because I feel very empathic and I have to feel how people feel, how they respond to like whatever I bring to them. And so I very much was a people pleaser because I didn't want to have to feel people's disappointment or
Mhm.
anger or upset, whatever it was. And so we end up managing other people's experiences of us
And emotions.
and emotions. And then we wonder why we're so tired. We're
Mhm.
like not just managing our own, but now like basically orchestrating everyone's reality around
Mhm.
us. And it's just not a very healthy
Yeah.
way to relate,
And let's
long.
break that down. Like that could look like the mother who is super mom, who's like the head of the PTA, who's making sure the kids have their lunches packed every day, who their husband has a lunch, who they're making sure they're going to all their sports, they're showing up for their friends. They're always the one who's got the gift ready or the plant ready or the, oh, I've got this for you ready. Like all of this different stuff. It's the ones who are just like seem to have it all together.
Right.
I don't know if anybody actually really does have it all together, but if they seem like they have it all together, I don't know. Do you think anybody actually has it all together?
No, which
Okay.
I love bringing that up. I'm like, I love just being out here being like, you know what? Sometimes my life is a total shit show. And that's okay,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
it's totally okay.
Yeah, even when I feel like I've got it all together, I've got a teenager. I probably don't
Yeah.
have it all together. You know what I mean? And actually, along
Yeah.
those lines, when we were just talking about this a minute ago, I was thinking about this concept I learned called the gap. So when I was living in my like fake reality is kind of what I look at it now because
I
in
used to call it fake too. It was the
yeah,
fake me.
yeah, because people would look at me from the outside and think I had it all together. I literally had
Yep.
the house with the white picket fence with 2.5 kids and life was
Yep.
great. And I was miserable on the inside. I think that's a telltale sign. And I was in a meditation class at the time, and we were talking about Joe Dispenza's work. And he has this concept, the gap, which is the gap between who you present yourself in the world to be and who you actually are. And I realized
Hmm.
that I had this huge gap. I wasn't living my purpose. I wasn't living my truth. I wasn't living authentically. So, yeah, that was my own personal experience of that. One of the ways that I see this show up in, like, say, dating is people will be like the cool girl or the cool guy. Like, they don't have any needs. They're just,
Yeah. You don't need to text me. You don't need to ask me out. Like, don't, whatever, whatever. No big deal. Yeah.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Or overextending yourself. You kind of nailed it with the persona that you just talked about. But I mean, that can show up with people who say yes to everything and then
Hmm.
they can't possibly meet
And they've
every.
said yes to everybody and they're showing up, but they're like mad they're there. They're
Right.
resentful. They're like, fuck, I'm
Yes.
so tired. I don't have time for this, but I'm going to go and pretend I'm loving it. Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's that too. Hmm.
Yep. Or
Hmm.
not being able to be present because you're on to whatever the next thing is that you have to go do. Like I
That was
actually,
definitely me back then. Yep.
yeah. I just recently, like somebody was planning we were trying to figure out our plan and I just know I hate being rushed because it puts me
Mm.
in that bad mood, right? And I was like, I really don't want to commit to this because I know that I cannot show up as my best self if I'm going to go in rushed that way. And I'm just thinking, man, I've had to do so much work to get to that point because ultimately, at least for me, I have that abandonment wound and tend to be
Yep.
more anxiously attached. And I have a fear of being rejected. And honestly, until I did this work to like heal that and accept myself and set these boundaries, guess what? I kept getting abandoned and rejected.
Of course, because the universe life is really cute at showing us the same lesson over and over again until we want to face it, deal with it, and heal it, which is really, cute. And we're going to come into boundaries because it's very, very important here of once you eradicate conditioning and actually we're going to list off, there's three things I want to go into here. First of, what is all together, right? Like I actually want to invite the listeners who are listening to think of all the people that they think they have it all together,
Yeah.
which is normally generally a story we're also telling ourselves that all of those people have it all together and there's something wrong with me. Like that was definitely a story I had because
Mhm.
you're right, nobody has it all together. We all have the ups and downs of life. And we might have a moment in time, a weekend where it's all together, but it can fall
Sure.
apart on Monday, right? There's the expansion, there's the contraction. So I just wanted to break that down for people that there is no such thing as all together. And next, I kind of want to break down, and if you have anything else to add to that, please feel free.
It's just making me think of the quote, comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm,
Like
oof,
anytime
yes,
you're
yes,
comparing
yes.
yourself to somebody else, you're probably already robbing yourself of your joy.
Yes. And anytime you're comparing, you're generally judging yourself. And if you're judging, somebody else even, you're also judging yourself, even if you don't know it, right? It's
Judgment is the root of all judgment. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So let's break down too then, what is conditioning? For people like, what do you mean? What's conditioning? What is conditioning? How
Yeah.
would you
I
break
mean,
that down?
I think mostly when I think of conditioning, I think of societal conditioning, but I think basically it's how we've been trained to operate in life. What we've
Mhm.
been told is like acceptable and non-acceptable behavior based off of whoever's decided this is the way it is. I'm like, where does it even start, right?
I know, right? You got to
Yeah,
break it down and go, who said?
right. But I
Who
think,
said?
right,
Yeah,
who's they? I always love when people are like, they said, I'm like, who's they? I don't even know who that
yeah.
is, you know?
But it can be really scary if you're in that people pleasing, trying to fit in, thinking something's, wrong with you of, okay, my family, my sister, my mother, my brother, you know, they won't like it if
Right,
I do this. What are they going to say? Right. So it's the closer relationships that we're afraid because somebody deemed, air
right.
quotes there, what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah. And I'm thinking like back to when I got my psychology degree. I mean, conditioning at its core is creating and forming a behavior, right? So I'm remembering like putting these pigeons in these boxes and training them to peck a lever every time they heard a sound. I mean, that's all it is. It
Mm.
is literally we have been trained to operate a certain way based off of whoever was training us. And that's kind of scary because up until very recent history, most people were unconsciously continuing to teach and mold people in the same way that they had been.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So it's
it's,
like our parents are learning from their parents, and their parents are learning from their parents. And some of this conditioning that is just being regurgitated essentially
yeah,
through same things I said to my kids when they were little. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that stuff, right? Like that doesn't make sense. But we just like literally become parrots and we regurgitate what we've heard, and our parents regurgitate what they heard, and so forth. And we're going back hundreds of years. And these things, they don't make sense. They actually don't make sense. But these are beliefs, limiting beliefs, conditioning, thoughts, expectations that we just pass down.
right,
And we actually don't dissect them and look at them and go, who said?
right. Why has it always been this way? Why are we still doing this?
Yeah. And does this serve me? Is this actually helpful? Does this serve me?
Right, absolutely.
And then when we go into boundaries,
Mhm.
because when we're living from this place of not truly being our authentic selves, and we're living through conditioning of other people telling us how we should live and how we should act and how we should behave and how we should show up and what we should and shouldn't do. All these shoulds. No shitting yourself if you are. It's literally like you're shitting on yourself. It sounds like
Exactly.
it too. Basically, we're not creating boundaries by an end result. Like there's no boundaries being held of how people can talk to us, how we talk to ourselves, how people can treat us, how we treat ourselves. There's generally a very loosey goosey boundary again still in there because we're afraid we're going to lose safety. We're afraid we're going to lose love. We're afraid we're going to lose belonging. We are so afraid that we're going to be abandoned and we're going to be hurt in the ways that we have been in the past. And then before we know it, we literally have very, very few, if not any boundaries.
Yeah. I don't think many people are actually taught how to have boundaries.
No.
I mean, my awareness of this came 8 years ago while in a divorce class where we were talking about boundaries, and I had this moment of like, oh my God, I don't have any boundaries.
Can you share some examples?
Yeah, I mean, there were just I a big one that's coming up today, actually. I've had a conversation about it earlier, and then someone just requested I do like a live on it later, is like those unspoken expectation and agreements. Like we feel other people need these things from us and we just do it without any sort of like conversation or communication around it. And then what happens is they expect it again and they expect it again. I started very small when I started with boundaries. I was like, no is a complete sentence. Like, no without feeling the need to then explain myself.
Mhm.
And I noticed there's always a path people tend to take when they start creating boundaries. Because most of the time, when people figure out that they don't have boundaries, they're pissed at the other people for pushing on the
Mm.
I didn't know. And actually, one of the things I just made a request the other night of my partner. I was like, I need to know where your edges are because I don't want to overstep them. And last year, I had someone actually say to me, if I can't respect your boundaries, I don't deserve to be in your life. And I just so appreciated that reflection because the people who are benefiting from you not having boundaries probably don't deserve to be in your life. And when you set those boundaries and they still push on them and can't accept them, that's information. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So I notice people, they get a little fierce at first when they set boundaries, like they're trying to force it, right? They're like coming in like hot. They're just mad that they haven't had boundaries. Sometimes people will do that thing where they realize they haven't set a boundary after the fact and just think, oh, well, I'll do it next time. But really, my invitation is always you can change your mind. Like go back and say, you
Mhm.
know what? Actually, after thinking about this, I've decided this doesn't work for me, which is a
Mhm.
great boundary in and of itself. This doesn't work for me. A friend was, I just watched her speak and she was talking about that the other day. A big one for me along people pleasing lines, which I think is probably like many of your listeners can relate, is the porous boundary. So you
Mm.
maybe have set this boundary up front, but then you kind of acquiesce your own lines of your boundary. You let people push on them. And an indicator for me when I've been porous with my boundaries is I get mad. I get mad at the other person,
Mm.
start to feel resentment towards them. But actually,
Yeah.
it's
I get
me.
frustrated.
Yeah, but it's me I'm frustrated at because I'm the one that didn't hold my boundary. So those are my
Such
thoughts
an
on that.
interesting Yeah, such an interesting observation. And for me, when it came into my boundary journey and deconditioning journey and all of this, of course, I at least, I'm not sure where you were along this journey into your tantric journey as well, but I had to learn how to reconnect to my body, to come home in my body, to create safety in my body, to create and not recreate, it was already there, to reconnect to my innate inner knowing, to my intuition, to my yes, my fuck yes,
Mhm.
and my fuck no. I
Yes.
had to reconnect and I used Tantra and the tools and the practices to create that self love, to reconnect to my body, to reconnect to my yeses and to my nos, and then I still use them to this day to check in and check what is truly a yes for me and what is truly a no for me. Is this aligned for me or is this not for me? And then I can create a boundary from that deep inner knowing place. And it's been easier to create boundaries from that deep inner knowing place than it was from that. Well, this probably doesn't sound good, and I don't even know why I'm saying it, but maybe I'll just say it and see what they say, right? See the loosey goosey there
Yes.
versus the no, this does not work for me. No, this does not work for me. This may, if you can offer an alternative if you want to, or if you continue to show up that way, I am going to do blank. So an example on Facebook, if somebody is, you know, shitting on me on my page per se, which I have before, generally it's family, right? And you just kind of show up and go, hey, you're welcome to your opinion. I respect your opinion. This is an open dialogue. I loved it. Actually, somebody said this last week. Probably a Vita coach as well, a sex love relationship coach. She's like, you are welcome to have your opinions, but you're coming into my house. You are coming into my digital house. And you are welcome to, but you cannot shit on my floor. Because if you
Right.
shit on my floor, I'm going to have to ask you to pick it up and leave. Right? Like literally, you can't throw and Dr. Lee Cordell, who's a friend and a really beautiful practitioner as well, who does a lot of deep trauma work. And she's amazing at really explaining it for people so they can understand it in layman terms. Talks about we all have this plot of land and
Mm,
we all have this fence around us. And this is our land, like this is our space. And sometimes people like to test, right? Certain people
mhm.
aren't always in integrity and they like to throw a little garbage over. And if you just pick it up and put it in your garbage, whatever, I'm not going to make a big deal about it. You let it go. And then they throw a little bit more over. And then they throw a little bit more. And before you know, you've got garbage coming in over these fence lines. And you're like, well, I took it the first time, just like what you said earlier. I picked it up the last time. Maybe I should just pick it up again. And it's actually about like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, this is my plot of land. This is my energetic space. This is my job to protect this space. And if you keep putting garbage over the fence onto my property, you need to create a boundary there. What is that boundary? Is it I'm going to block you? Is it I'm going to put up a stone wall? Is it I'm going to throw it back at you? Whatever it may be. But like, what is the boundary that you're going to create if people are going to keep putting it over? And it's not easy. I find it's really challenging for a lot of women to state boundaries when somebody's been pushing and pushing and pushing. And then they're like, fuck, they've actually been doing this and I didn't recognize it and know it. How do I push back now? Do you have any suggestions for people who are in that place?
That's really sneaky, but I think that's speaking exactly to the porous boundaries.
Hmm.
I would name it, when you
Mm.
recognize it, like, and that's not, that sounds easy, simple, but not easy. There we go.
Hmm.
Name it. I just recognize this thing that's happening and then state your need, you know,
Yeah.
and I
I'm
love,
noticing your garbage is starting to creep over the fence onto my property. I need you to remove it and make sure that doesn't happen again.
yeah. I mean, I think you can do it in such a kind and compassionate way. I
Yeah.
think the boundaries get fierce the more they get crossed, right? It's a
Hmm.
request. And maybe your request is all that's needed. But if you keep noticing it, then you got to get a little bit more firm. And I would honestly go in knowing how many like chances you're willing to give someone.
Hmm.
You can't just
Hmm.
keep requesting it over and over if someone's not respecting
Exactly.
your
And another
request.
key thing I think with setting boundaries is if you're noticing you're angry, you cannot create a boundary from that place. You're triggered in that moment. You actually need to use a tool, which I've shared many of them, and I'll share them all again. Not all, there's so many of them, but you need to find a tool to go disperse your anger, come
Yeah.
back to grounding, come back to center, come back to self, come back to grounded and connected, and then state and ask your boundary. So the tools to release the charge when you're angry. One of my favorite ones actually right now is I love swamping, originally trained with Mama Gina for a long time. Of releasing the anger, the fear, the grief, and so forth, and always closing it up with turn on. That's amazing. But I've actually bridged it recently with beating the crap out of a punching bob in the basement. And oh my gosh, it's amazing. It is so therapeutic. And I actually beat it with my cane that I used when I broke my ankle 10 years ago because it hurts my hands. So it's
Mm.
so, so good to, again, release it and then come into turn on, come into grounded, come into, okay, I feel good now. Now I state my boundary. You can go for a walk. Naturally you're doing EMDR when you're walking, when you're, doing bilateral stimulation. You can go for a hard workout. You can go for a run if you like to run. Journaling is another way. Putting your feet in the grass and just doing some bone breathing is one of my favorites too. It's a beautiful tantric practice. I actually think it's a Taoist practice, but very similar.
Mhm.
What else? What are some other tools to ground and to come back? Spring cleaning is
So,
a beautiful tool.
yeah, shaking.
Shaking, having a shower or a bath.
Yeah. Dance the answers is one of my, like, if I'm up in my head about something, I need to get out of my head. So,
Yeah.
dance is one of my favorite ways.
And breath work is another one. Actually, when you say that, if I'm unsure and I'm shaky, even a 10-15 minute breath work session, all of a sudden around the middle, I'm like, oh, I know what to do now. It just
Yes.
like comes through. It's a
Right.
beautiful way to gain clarity on something of how to answer a situation.
Yeah. I heard a technique not long ago that I use quite a bit. I'll have like past relational trauma come up in my relationship now, and I know the trigger is mine, but I want to like know if there's a request to make, which would essentially be a boundary, right? And it's actually like when do I know this feeling from before? What does it remind me of? What do I need? Like what would make this feel better? And a lot of the times it's just our own work, right? But then we
Mhm.
know if there's a request. I think it gives us a moment to get clear, like, what is our boundary? How can this person support me? And then are they willing to? Because that's information.
Yeah. and they might not be, and that's okay. You're not it's not a demand,
Right.
it's a request.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Any other tips on boundaries and how to help people see them, navigate them, create them, notice that they have porous boundaries? I think the
Yeah.
big trigger is you're angry, you're resentful, you're frustrated, and you're doing it anyway.
Right. Well, I think you
Or
nailed
you're
it. I think most people get like pissed off when they realize like someone's crossed a boundary they haven't actually set. So to your point, like make sure you're not activated, really get clear about what the boundary is. And, yeah, just making sure you're very clear with your communication around it.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to add in there too, sometimes a lot of women I notice can't verbalize their boundary, but check in. Can you text it? Could you
Yeah.
email it?
Yes.
Sometimes it's easier on a phone call than it is in person.
Hmm.
Or a Zoom call. So, check in. What do you need to create that boundary? And then also, I think I would add in there, what is the epic self-care that you have planned for afterwards to soothe and calm your nervous system for doing something that was really probably a little activating because it's not comfortable if it's the first few times you're doing boundaries.
Yeah. I had a man ask in a workshop that I was leading this last weekend. Well, what happens when you know you've got to set this boundary, but you're afraid that other people are not going to receive it? And I love to quote one of the four agreements, which is how other people think about you or experience what you've offered is really none of your business. So, as long as you're doing it in a kind and compassionate way, you can't manage. That would be people pleasing, right? How someone's going to receive the information. I think as long as you're trying to do it in a kind and compassionate way, it's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. And if you don't, people are sometimes like, well, I don't want to create boundaries. Da, da, da. Like, it will add up in your system. You are technically self-abandoning
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
You are hurting you. um, you're treating yourself poorly and you're actually causing harm, which is really, really, it's hard to see. Like in the beginning, you're like, oh shit, what am I doing? But you're actually causing harm and you're creating actually more trauma in your own system by not speaking your truth, by not getting your needs met. And if you have children, I hate to say this, but you're also modeling this for your children. So if that helps you, that helped me go, oh shit, I need to change some of the ways I'm doing these things because I was modeling this, like as we're talking, conditioning coming all the way through. And it was like, I don't want my children feeling, even though they're teenagers at the time, I don't want them feeling this and moving this and teaching this forward. Like it's time to break the cycle and it's time to actually speak my truth and create boundaries that serve me and teach them how to create boundaries that serve them. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
easier to do it for our children than it is for ourselves.
Totally. And boundaries teach people how to treat you. I don't think people think of them that way, but it really
Mhm.
does. It teaches people where your edges are. And I love that you brought the kid thing in because that I have boundaries with my kids. I think it's so important. They know if it's after 9 o'clock and I am in my bathtub, do not interrupt me unless the house is on
Yeah,
fire. And
absolutely.
I think we are undoing an awful lot of conditioning that we've brought down the line from other women who were told to put themselves last, who do become the passive aggressive, resentful, angry martyrs because they have not been taking care of themselves. I'm like, this ends here. I want my kids to know that their needs and desires are just as important as everybody else's, that their pleasure is just as important as everybody else's, and that they deserve to honor themselves and show people. So I think that's another way. Just how
Yeah.
you show up in the world is a good way to set a boundary as well.
Absolutely. And yes, yes to creating boundaries with teenage adult children and even younger children, right?
Yeah.
There's the rules, growing up where they had to learn how to make their own lunches. I would check them. I was not going to do everything for them. They learned how to do their laundry, different things. And even now that they're more adults, they're all adults now, technically. Sometimes I need to create boundaries still with them, right? They're adults. They can be as aggressive as they desire to be. And sometimes I even, through this divorce is like, hey, I'm willing to support you and listen to your emotions and hear what's going on for you, but I'm not available for you to projectile vomit onto me. I'm not available for you to tell me how I should be doing things, like different things
Mhm.
like that. And they don't love it, right? Who loves it as a child who's left the nest and now their parents telling them another thing? But sometimes they just don't know that they are crossing boundaries. And I think it's actually a really good lesson for people to learn of, oh shit, that was a boundary I crossed. And then we start to actually recognize, oh, maybe I am crossing boundaries in other places. Like, where am I being too, I don't even know what the word is. It's not too much, but where am I crossing other people's boundaries is the better word.
Yeah, definitely.
And where am I crossing my own boundaries? That's another key one.
Yeah.
Self boundaries. Where am I not being true to myself and where am I self abandoning? That one's huge, I think, for so many.
Yeah, I think that's just cyclical. The self-abandonment, or I have a friend that calls it self-betrayal, which I'm always like, oh God,
Mm.
that hits me worse.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that's where it starts. We can't actually set boundaries with other people if we have no boundaries with ourselves. And if we don't even know
Yeah.
what our boundaries are, you know what I mean?
Let's list some. Let's list examples of some boundaries that we have with ourselves that are self-honoring that many women, I guess, kind of skip for a while.
Yeah, I would say the big one for me is time. I realize
Mm.
how much time I used to give away for free. And not that
Ah,
I'm not willing to like do that with the people I love, right? But I think I got very used to people pulling on my energy and feeling like I had to respond to that by giving of it when really I did not need to.
it's a good point. Yeah, as a mom of young kids, I learned that very young, right? Show up, do everything as much as possible, whatever they need, give, 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 give. And before, I hit my end of my 30s, I was absolutely fried, exhausted, burnt out, and depleted, right?
Yeah.
And that is a key sign. Um, yeah, another sign I think will be just that you're angry, you're frustrated, you're not happy, there's more, there's a feeling and a calling for more, but you just don't know what it is. Any others that coming up for you?
Another big one I noticed with women, and I remember a business coach was like, you need to put time on your calendar for you. And I was so resistant to it. So I guess it's another time thing, but a bit different. She's like, this is literally time for you. So
Mm.
it's, I've stopped workshops right in the middle of them because some woman has said, this just feels so selfish to be
Mm.
focused on myself right now. And I'm like, this is the most selfless thing you can do because we only have so much capacity. We
Hmm.
only have so much energy, time, space, all of it that we can use for whatever. And we've been trained to think that we can keep pulling from an empty cup. That's where we end up like totally just knocked on our butts. So
Yeah.
actually taking time, like, and it's interesting. I will still feel this when I get time where I'm like, I could go find something to do or take time with myself. I'll feel the resistance come in still. And that now is, I'm like, I'm feeling the resistance. I have to stay home and be by myself because it's only then do I actually check in with myself, feel what is actually my energy versus somebody else's, really feel into like what's going on for me, what needs need to be met that aren't, I just think it's now looking back, it cracks me up. I'm like the queen of self-care, but man, it was hard fought.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Now I am totally the queen of self-care as well. I'm another queen, fellow
Yes.
queen.
Yes, queen.
But yeah, I say that we have to keep our gas tanks very, very full. Like at least three-quarters and up. Like every time it goes below three-quarters, like top it up, top it up, top it up.
Yeah.
Because there are times, like even a few weeks ago, while I was navigating divorce and had COVID at once, like my tank got depleted fast.
Yeah.
And it takes work to keep it topped up. And we need that to just, again, continue coming back to ourselves and self-care in so many different ways. And for me, self-care looks like a whole pile of different tantric practices, a whole pile of journaling practices, different ways to follow my pleasure, music,
Mhm.
sing, dance, all of these somatic tantric practices that just, again, fill our cups, which is beautiful. Another way that you reminded me that I used to allow people to cross my boundaries, which was a big one, was actually how my ex-father-in-law talked to me because he was outright so rude
Mm,
at my own dinner table
yeah,
after I'd cooked, but people were like, oh, ha, ha, he's just old, ignore him, right? But that comes at you and it wears on you, and you're like, damn. And it would actually put me in a freeze response. I actually couldn't respond generally.
right.
And then I had to learn how to actually start put some answers in my phone, getting ready for him, and I had to like read them. a lot before he came over, right? Getting ready to, okay, how am I going to hold this boundary? What am I going to say if he says this? Like, because it actually did put me in a freeze response and I needed some help bringing me out of that freeze response to put the attention back on him. And actually, some of the Cassia work really helped me for that. Cassia Urbanic.
Hmm.
That was, the good girl work really was beautiful at, again, putting it back on them.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have gotten better over time at that as well, where I actually had an instance when I was in the middle of my divorce where I was hanging out with my parents for a moment, and I can't remember, something very disrespectful was said in front of my kids, which was historically something that was happening with my ex-husband. That's when I decided to leave. Actually, I heard myself say, "Do as I say, not as I do." And I was like, that is an awful way to lead by example. But I remember it was dinner time. We were about to sit down. And I was like, come on, kids, get in the car. We're leaving. Nobody talks to your mom that way.
Mhm. Well
Yeah.
done.
And I've done that a few other times. I will literally stop a conversation if it's starting to go negative and be like, no, if you actually want to hear what I have to say, I'm willing to share. But if, I'm not open to receiving or this
Yeah.
doesn't work for me, which is pretty bold, right? But I think it's always in such a loving and compassionate way. And it's also real time treating them how to treat me and teach them how to treat me as well. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
taking practice though, gotta build
Yes, it
that.
takes some work. And that's what, other coaches and everybody's, allowing us, teaching us how to do. This is what we teach our clients. Some of the work that we're doing, yes, we're doing sacred sexuality work, we're doing tantric work, we're doing emotional healing work, we're doing embodiment work, somatic work, grounding work. We're learning how to create boundaries. We're learning how to decondition the muck and the crap that has been taught to us over the years. We're doing so much and it's all connected. And that's why sometimes it's so hard for us to explain exactly what we do.
Right.
But it depends what you need that day and depends what's next, what's alive for you, what's coming up in your day to day that you need to take back into your life and put some of these tools in place. So it's a beautiful, beautiful journey. I have absolutely loved this journey and I'm so grateful for it. And I'm really grateful that you've come on today and we got to share, little bits and pieces to help people understand what is possible and how we work with people in the so many different ways that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And to recognize that both of us started at a totally different place. And so if we can do it, so can you.
Exactly. Exactly. Can you please tell everyone, Erin, what you got going on right now, how people can work with you, where they can find you? We're going to drop the links in the show notes too, but fill us in.
Sure. So the latest is I'm starting a men's group next week. So I'm super
Ah,
excited about that. And interestingly
nice.
enough, boundaries is the like top thing coming up for these men. So it's not just women, it's like everyone is working on boundaries
Yeah.
now. And then, as I mentioned, I've got a pleasure membership that I run out on Facebook. So it's for women who are really looking for a fun community where they can reclaim their pleasure and be supported. And we do all sorts of fun practices out there. I'm sure you share some similar practices. And then, yeah, aside from that, right now I'm just working one-on-one with clients. So
Love it. So, so good. And just for letting people know what's going on with me right now, I have a couple spots open for private or couples coaching come the new year, starting in January. And of course, you can always check out my website, getyoursexyback.ca for Canada, for remembering that one. There is my Jade Egg course on there, as well as a Sacred Pleasure membership, which is a self-paced program that you can also go through and play and listen to like 18 months of different content and lectures and practices and you name it. And of course, I always offer a free complimentary call as well. So if you're like, I don't know what's going to serve me, what do I want, what's best for me right now, hop on a call. I'm happy to chat with you and see what's going on and help you figure out what is your next step. I'm happy to do that. I'm sure you are as well too, Erin.
yeah, absolutely. You're reminding me, actually, I have a 6-week date night series for couples as well that's tantric based. So hey,
Awesome. Love
there's so
it.
much stuff. Yeah, we do a lot of
Love
things.
it. Yeah, and in the new year, 2025, I'm going to be offering some couples retreats for weekends and weeks. We're putting some things together. So info will be coming soon. If you want on the email list, there's probably a link also in the show notes to, get any of my freebies that I have out there. I don't know which one would feel aligned right now. We're going to put one in there today. I think Activate Your Turn On workbook feels really, really juicy. We'll put that in there. And then of course you'll get notifications as what's coming up in live with me. But that workbook on its own is pretty powerful. It's going to go into boundaries, it's going to go into self-care, it's going to go into pleasure, it's going to go into lots of different ways that you can take care of yourself and start deconditioning and start turning on and start creating boundaries and just starting your own journey. It's a beautiful place to start. So we'll drop that in there. Thank you so, so much. We're gonna put all your links also in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining, and, yeah, any last words?
Man, it's scary, but set the boundaries. It will change your
Love it.
life. Yeah.
It will. It will, it will. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Erin. Till next time, everyone.